Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the second part of our session focusing on selecting a methodology and research design, particularly in qualitative research. So today we're going to be continuing with what we started with yesterday. So I'm just going to share my screen, and I look forward to this session with you. All right. Okay, so as I've indicated, we're continuing with our qualitative research, selecting methodology, and your research design. So just a quick recap of yesterday, specifically looking at some of the questions that you had asked. There were two questions that were focusing on the sample size in qualitative research, but also a question around how do you know when you've reached saturation in qualitative research? And as I had indicated, there's been quite a number of scholars who have looked at what is the number that is acceptable when it comes to conducting qualitative research. And I also indicated that often this is a conversation that you would need to have with your supervisor as well. So in line with my responses yesterday, in what I shared with you, I spoke about the minimum of 5 people to 10 people, but you can go as large as even having 50 participants. And you'll see here, there's quite a number of scholars who have debated and offered input and written about what is the acceptable minimum requirement when it comes to qualitative research. And you'll see scholars who've written a lot on research methodologies, such as Clark and Braun, Potts, Fugard, Johnson, Guest and Bonds. They have indicated that you can think about a minimum sample of at least 12 before you can say you've reached saturation. So you interview people up to 12 before you can say you've reached saturation. But also, the issue of number is a debatable one, as the first point also indicates as well. A sample size should be large enough. And the question is, what is large enough, right? To sufficiently describe the phenomenon of interest and address the research question at hand. But at the same time, a large sample risks having repetitive data. So even though you've now interviewed 10 people, but because you are intent on interviewing 20 people, you continue interviewing even though there's nothing new that's coming up. And the argument here is that is when you start realizing that you have reached saturation. So there really is no need for you to go beyond the number when you can start seeing that there's repetition. And these are some of the issues that I've highlighted yesterday. So I just wanted to touch on that as a way to bring us and make a connection between yesterday and today's session. When we stopped yesterday, we were talking about focus groups. And I would like us to start there because also in the interest of time, I just rushed through very quickly in talking about focus groups. And it is one of the research designs that maybe some of you would want to consider in your own research studies as well. And as I indicated, a focus group is a form of group interview where you have a conversation with a group of people instead of one-on-one, right? And when it comes to the description, indicated that there is usually a variety of opinions. So you're interested in people's opinions, you're interested in people's perceptions on a particular issue, and you would like to gain more information or understanding on what people perceive about a particular issue. What are some of the values that they put to that particular issues? What are some of their beliefs? What are the common things that are often said or believed about that particular issue in a particular society, in a particular group, in a particular community, right? So it's useful if you're trying to explore something, all right? And we've also indicated that people are not the same. So there might be people who are talkative, some people who are a bit quiet. And if you're going to be conducting a focus groups, you also need to be very vigilant, very aware, to ensure that if you have about 6 to 10 people, it's not only one person or two people that are domineering and that are the ones who are speaking all the time. So when you have a session that takes 2 hours, you find that in the 2 hours, two people spoke for more than an hour of that session, then that does not become helpful for a focus group. So you are very active as a facilitator in mediating, in ensuring that not one person or only few people dominate the conversation. Okay. And then when it comes to the group composition, we also spoke about avoiding power differentials. Will the employee be open if the employer is in the room? Is that something that is wise for you to do as a focus group where you put the employees and the employer together in a group? Again, this is going to be determined by the focus of the phenomena that you're looking at. So if you're going to be doing a study on bullying and you put me together with my employer in a room and my employer is bullying me, do you think I'm going to feel confident and at ease to be able to speak freely in a group like that? Right? So it also depends on what topic is it that you are focusing on, right? So if you put people in a group together on a topic that is as sensitive as bullying, it might lead to challenges of power differential. So in that case, you might choose to then have different focus groups where you have a focus group understanding the perceptions of bullying from an employee perspective, and then have another focus group looking at perceptions of bullying from the employer perspective. And then if you're looking at something like wages or salary increases or something like that, you might want to get perceptions also around what are some of the challenges and issues that people would want to bring to the forefront as it relates to issues around wages and salaries. So the topic that you choose will determine for you whether you would like to have a mixed group or not a mixed group. And that also speaks to issues of power as well. Why do you want to have employees and employers in the same room? And would it still work, and would it be beneficial if you look at them separately? So you need to think about what is it that you want to achieve with this focus group, and can that still be achieved if people are in separate groups or not? And if they have to be combined, because you're also looking at dynamics and getting people in the same space where they can interact with each other, that's also something to consider. But always at the core thinking about, would this silence other people? Would people feel free to be able to be in conversation with each other? Those are the things you need to think about as a facilitator of a focus group. Okay. All right. And then what is it that the focus group does? You are analyzing for content. What is it that people are saying in the group? But you're also interested in group dynamics and interaction. So it's not you asking questions and people responding to you, but it's also about people being in conversation and engagement with each other. They can agree on issues, they can disagree on issues, they can put their case forward, they can justify the points that they're making. So it's about creating a space where people can have these conversations about interaction among group members. Hence, it's not a one-on-one where they just respond to whatever issue that you put on the table, and they respond to you as well. You're interested in how does the group arrive at a collective opinion and voice? Do they arrive at a collective opinion and voice, right? what are the dynamics that are coming up? What are some of the issues that coming up that are making people to really be divergent in their views, or where they are in agreement? So what are those things that are coming up? And how are voices of dissent negotiated as well? So maybe the majority agree on something, but there's this one person who just like, no, I don't think that's how things should be. So if you think about the jury system in the US, for example, where all the jury members have to agree on the guilty or not guilty verdict. And there's 12 juries, and 11 of them are saying, yes, this person is guilty, but one says the person is not guilty. So the kinds of negotiations that happen in that space. This is a very different example, but I'm just giving it as an example of this idea of group dynamics, and where people are talking about a particular issue, and in that moment, learning from each other, sharing their beliefs about a particular issue, and also having the opportunity to hear other people who may be thinking differently about a particular issue, and how those conversations are taking place. Okay. Be aware of your own influence as the moderator, facilitating the focus group, and how your presence and your engagement is also affecting group dynamics. So you also need to be very self-aware and reflect also on the progress. And what is your reading of the group? What are the things that you are noticing? What are the things that you are observing? What are the things that are standing out for you? That may be obvious or not so obvious. So you also need to be very aware of the space, because these, not only what the people are saying, but also the process. So it's not only about content, but also the process. So what is the process telling you about understanding this phenomenon? Okay. And if there are dominant voices, how do you deal with those? Okay. And then the number of questions when it comes to focus group. You also don't want to have too many questions. I mentioned this before. You don't want to have too many questions, because in a group, again, you want to give as many people as possible the opportunity to be able to reflect and to respond to what you would have put forward. So if you have 10 people in the room, then one question might take a while for people to share their opinion, their perception, and others also engaging on the other person's response, and other people also responding on that response, or giving their own response. So it may take a while. So you don't want to have too many questions, because that can lead you to also rushing people, because you want to go down your questions and make sure you ask all your questions. So now you may cut people off because you might be worried of time. And again, here, the process, the sequence, how you're going to do this. The opening, where you lay the foundation, what this focus group is about. So you offer all the facts in terms of that. And then introductory part, where there's interaction. Maybe these are people that don't necessarily know each other or are familiar with each other. So the introduction also then forms part of that. Always focusing on the topic, right? Linking the introduction to the topic and putting that in context for the conversation. And then you have your key questions. And as much as possible, avoid giving examples, because people will now follow the example that you have given and take that as the direction that they need to go. So you don't also want to lead people, right? And asking why, we spoke about this as well. Sometimes it may come across as being judgmental, and people might want to be defensive if you ask, but why? Why don't you believe in this? Why don't you do this? Why do you think that's wrong? So as much as possible, just be careful. Not that you should not ask why questions, but be very aware and conscious as you ask the why, in terms of what are you trying to get at by asking that question? And you can use cases, what we call vignettes, where you offer a scenario, and then you ask people to offer reflections and speak to the scenario that you would have put forward. Okay. And then your discussion guide. So what we would often call an interview schedule, if you're doing a one-on-one. In a focus group, we call them discussion guides. What is a discussion guide? It's the agenda that you use for your group discussion. So what the process is going to look like, the questions that you're going to ask, what is it that you want to achieve. And as I always say, everything that you do, it always has to lead you back to your research objective. So as you're doing the focus group, the engagements, conversations, everything is so that you reach your research objectives, right? Is the process, are the questions that you're asking, the engagement that you're having going to assist you to reach your objectives, right? And then the purpose also of this guide is to provide direction for discussion. So you know that after this question, this is what I would like to ask. This is the direction that I would like the focus group to go. So that's also important to make sure that you stay on point and on course. Your questions, again, just like on one-on-one, you order from the general to the specific. So the bigger question to the very specific ones. Again, sometimes you might want to follow up based on how people are responding. Okay. All right. And then the characteristics of a discussion guide, it's a tool for you as the moderator to recall important points. What are the points that you want to put across? What are the points that you want to make sure are attended to in that focus group? So you may modify it. There is room for improvisation. And that's the beauty, because you're also led and guided by the process. What is it that's unfolding? And as you see that, then you can improvise. But through your improvisation, always be thinking about your research objective, so that you don't start going off on a tangent that takes you away from what your research is about. Okay. Again, it's a guide, right? It's not a questionnaire, it's a guide that you use. You have open questions that allow for people to explore. So not leading questions or closed questions, but questions that allow for people to be able to elaborate. Okay. And then the actual focus group itself, it's about the atmosphere. Where are you going to be having this focus group? Is it easy for people to get there? Is the space conducive? And it's important at the beginning to provide the ground rules. As I said, you are with a group of people. So it's important for people to know what's allowed, what's not allowed in terms of respect, allowing others to speak, not laughing at people. So the ground rules that are going to ensure that the space is safe for everybody to be able to open and share freely without fear of judgment or being laughed at. So you set that tone at the very beginning as the moderator. Introduction pattern. So this is just some guidelines in terms of how one would do this actually. So you welcome people, you give an overview and what the topic is about, you engage the ground rules, and then you start with the first question to get the process going. After welcoming and introductions. Okay, and then when you're done, after the 1 hour or 2 hours, depending how long it's going to be, you as the moderator, you bring everything back together. So you do a quick summary and check in. So you check in with everybody to say, is this an adequate summary? Is it a true reflection of the issues that were discussed today? These are some of the issues that were highlighted. Would you say that this is how you also saw it and understood it? Okay, and you can also at that point again offer an opportunity for reflection or some remarks to conclude at the end, so that people can also have the opportunity to be able to do that. Okay, and then from there, you close the focus group. All right. And then still continuing with the research designs, one of the many and under ethnography, again, one of the steps or the processes that one would use when it comes to data collection is, again, participant observation. So looking specifically, again, at participant observation, and again, this was very one of the data collection processes that are used in disciplines such as anthropology, right? Where many years ago, anthropologists were very interested in cultures and groups and going into villages and trying to understand people's way of life. And obviously, if you want to understand people's way of life, you cannot do that in 2 hours or in just a day. So it often requires one to immerse yourself into that community or that culture. So the researcher's role in observation studies. And again, when it comes to observation, you can be an observer at different levels. You can be a complete participant observer. And this you can do by concealing your role as a researcher. So you go as this newcomer in a community, in a group, and you are a participant, but at the same time, you are observing. You're observing the interactions, the practices, how people do things, but you're not just observing, you're also participating in all of those, but you conceal your role as a researcher. So people understand you as just someone in their community. They're not aware that you're actually a researcher. And then the second way in which one can be a participant observer is if your role as a researcher is known. So you go into the community and people know that you're a researcher. I'm sure you can also start already thinking about ethical issues or implications around concealing your role as a researcher if you are going to be using what you have learned and observed for your own academic purposes afterwards. Without people having known, because if people don't know, then what are the chances that you got consent, right? So these are things also to think about. So when we go back thinking about research practices in the past and many of the ethical dilemmas, you will understand why now we have such stringent ethical considerations and requirements when you conduct research, because many communities were actually deceived by us as academics, as scholars. And we need to take responsibility for that. And then complete observer or non-participant. So here you are just observing. So you're observing the interactions, you're observing what happens in the community. There's no participation at all. All right. So that's one way. So you're there, you are not participating, you are observing. People can see you. You're just hanging around, you're just observing, but you're not participating. Or the observation can even happen in such a way that people do not see you. And this is one of the processes or the kind of observation that would be done by people in psychology, for example, where you observe from behind a one-way glass, right? Where you want to see how people are going to behave in a particular scenario, or when they are confronted by a particular thing that you would have set up as an experiment. So most of the experimental studies within the psychology field discipline would sometimes be in a one-way mirror, or in a one-way glass, where the person is not aware that they're being observed or they're being studied. Okay, and then types of observations. These vary from completely structured or systematic observations to unstructured or naturalistic observation. So the structured ones is when there's a schedule for observation, and also if there are certain things that you observe and you don't observe everything. So let's say you are in a community, you're interested in one aspect of the traditional ritual of a particular community. So you're not necessarily interested in other aspects or living conditions of that particular community, but there's this specific ritual maybe that the community does once a week or once a month, and that's what you're interested in. So that would be the only thing that you would observe. And then outside of that, you do not observe anything else within that community. So that would be very structured. And there would be a schedule, because maybe you know that ritual happens on a Thursday in the evening. So there's a schedule for it, and you would go and observe during that particular time. And then there are unstructured observations where you just watch people or processes in their natural environment. So even if maybe you are interested in animal studies and you're interested in one aspect of a particular animal in the hunting processes. So you go and you watch or you observe these animals in their natural habitat, and you just observe them throughout the day, and then maybe at specific times of the day, in the morning, the afternoon, or late in the evening as they hunt. So you observe, and then you're able to tell us about the hunting processes of that particular animal. So we read about that, we watch it if maybe you documented it, and then that's how we get to learn and know more about that particular practice or activity of that animal or practices of a group of people. So, as I've indicated, again, when it comes to observations and studies such as this, there are ethics or ethical implications that you need to be thinking about as a researcher, ethics in observation studies. So, if your role is concealed, then there is an element of deception there, because people think, oh, you just came, you're part of the community, or you just came, you're interested in what's happening, you're there. They don't know that you're actually there conducting a study. So chances of you getting informed consent obviously are non-existent, because you need to explain if you're asking people for consent. So that kind of study would violate the principle of privacy and also respecting people and autonomy, and for people to be able to give permission for you to do the work that you're doing. So that kind of study, chances of them getting approval are very, very, very slim. You would really need to motivate in ways that it would make sense to an ethics committee as to why you would want to do that. Okay. Again, this idea of going native, taking on the values and morals of the group, and not necessarily because you want to be part of the group, but because you want to conduct this research and you believe that for this research to be authentic, you actually need to immerse yourself in ways that lead you to inverted commas, going native. Okay, so these are, again, ethical dilemmas that one needs to think about. And then if you're going to be recording people, if you're going to be taking down notes that you're going to be using later on, or video recording people without their consent, again, that is an ethical dilemma. Taking field notes as you observe people, and then writing and making interpretations and analysis and conclusions about people without their consent, again, is another ethical dilemma. So these are just some of the points that I want to highlight to you tonight for you to consider and think about if you were to want to conduct studies such as these ones, where you do observations or you are a participant observer in the field, that you seriously need to think about ethical issues around that. Okay. And then there are different ways in which one can do observations. The first one is you're doing this because you want to describe something, you want to describe phenomena. So there, you are not participating, you're just observing, and you just note what you see, and then you make an analysis of your observations. But what's important is that it's very critical that you don't make any judgments or conclusions, because you have not engaged with people, you have not gotten a deep understanding of what's going on. So your analysis would just be based on noting what you see. This is what you noted, this is what you saw, this is how things appeared. And you cannot go further than that to say this therefore means that. Right? Because that then becomes a judgment that might be a challenge or problematic, because you're using your own value judgment. Analysis, you observe so that you can make a particular analysis where you interpret what you observed. What does it mean? So you sit with that, you sit with the data, you sit with literature, you engage, and then you say, okay, how does one interpret this? What does it mean that animals hunt at this time of the day? Could it be because it's easier at that time? Could it be because other animals are going to water to get water? Is it because the other one's guard is down? So you have observed and you say, what does this mean? What does this mean in terms of us understanding these processes that I'm observing? And then you make interpretations based on this, and then you make an analysis so that we understand, why does this particular animal only hunt in the morning? Why does this one only hunt in the evening? So that we get that understanding, right? And then you do observations where you then offer a reflection, right, on how your description and analysis was done, the methods you used in observing. Did you use binoculars? Would you sit somewhere in a bench and observe? Did you make notes? So what kind of reflection are you offering us? And then ethical issues and problems to consider, and then your reflection on those ethical dilemmas or issues and how you have dealt with them, and what are the implications of these ethical issues, and then also the reactions of the observers. Did people just ignore you? Did someone come up to you and speak to you? And how was that? So some reflections on the whole process is also very critical. And then clarifying also based on what you're describing and your analysis. And then if there's further inquiry beyond what you've observed, suggestions on what could be done beyond what you have done also is an important thing to also think about. So these are the various levels that one can think about how the observation process works, and then what you can do with your observations. Okay. And you can take the notes on site as you're observing. You can make the notes or further notes when you get home. And as I've indicated, sometimes you just take the notes, or you observe, or you use video recordings. And again, here, video recordings, are people aware that they're being video recorded? Who's going to be seeing these recordings? What are you going to be doing with these recordings? Are people's faces going to be shown? So all those things that you need to think about. And then just also just an explanation about the place itself, to give your reader a picture of the place, the space, the process of the observation. And I say here at the bottom, you may even wish to make a diagram of the layout of the area in which you are observing. Was it in a park? Was it in a stadium? Where was it? To also give such an overview to your reader about this. Okay, so for those who are interested in observations, the question is, why go to all this trouble in doing this work, in doing observation studies, because there are many researchers who do observation studies, because you want to gather live data. You want data as it happens. You want to see things as they happen, as they evolve in the moment. So not staged, not with a scheduled time or anything like that. You want things as they happen, right? So natural phenomena as it happens. And also first-hand information. So you were there, you observed the ritual, you saw what happened, you observed everything, the processes, what happens, what comes next, and how does it end. So there's that first-hand information. And you experience the context as well, because you were there at that place in that moment. You saw that other animal maybe chasing another animal. So experiencing in context. You may see what others unconsciously miss. So when people are in the moment or are busy with whatever it is that is happening that you're observing, they're not consciously thinking about it, something that is happening, right? So what is it that happens that maybe people might not be conscious of? So people unconsciously miss something if they're not paying particular attention to it. Okay. Right. And of course, you may gain access to things which are not freely talked about in interviews. So you actually see things as they happen live, which may not be explained in the same way if someone was to explain the process to you instead of you observing as it happens. Okay. And then another research design, I think this is the last one, is the visual methods. Visual methods have become quite popular in recent times as another form of qualitative research design that many qualitative scholars or people interested in qualitative research have started drawing from. So moving beyond text, moving beyond the written, or complementing the written with the visual. And again, some level of triangulation as well, saying what are the different ways in which one can get rich data. So beyond just talking to people, you also focus on or rely on the visual methodology, and what is it that one can get from doing that, and how does one make meaning of that. So visual research is a qualitative research methodology that relies on artistic mediums to produce and represent knowledge. And this can happen in many different ways. So it can be film, can be photography, drawings, paintings, sculptures, and then an analysis of this. So people who are, so like for example, at UNISA, we've got the Department of Music and Art, but we also have people in other different departments as well who also rely on photography, on drawing, on film. We've got communication science department where also film is very central to people who are interested in film studies, in journalism. So these are very interesting things to also think about. So drawings also as a visual method possibility. Photography also, photo voice is something that has become very huge in many of the disciplines in the social sciences. And what images do, the drawings, the paintings, is that they add on to assisting us to understand sometimes some of the subconscious things, but to also understand sometimes some of the things that people cannot express in words. So they provide another layer of understanding human experience and phenomena. Okay, so what are some of the types of visual methods that many qualitative researchers use? One of the popular ones is photo voice. It was conceptualized by Caroline Wang and Mary Burris. And with photo voice, participants are provided with a camera. So obviously as a researcher, you need to have funding for this, because if you're going to be having 10 people or 20 people who are part of your study, then you need to give them 20 cameras. So a while back when photo voice started becoming popular, many researchers would get these small cameras. I forget what they're called now, that disposable cameras that participants could use. But as we know today, it's much easier for us because many people have got smartphones. So now people use smartphones to do photo voice research. And so what happens there? You ask people to produce an image based on an account of some particular experience. So what does it mean to belong to a particular community? What does it mean to live on university campus? So the experiences of being a student on campus, what are some of the things that make that experience good or not good for you? So people would take pictures of things that are significant for them on campus and then reflect on those. And that would be photo voice. So these projects that people would do with photo voice allow for the participants to be in control of generating the data. So it's not someone just asking them series of questions in an interview, but the participant has got the camera in their hand, and they therefore are in control and can decide what data would be generated. So they would decide to take a picture of the library because the library is significant to them in particular ways. We know some of the challenges that some students are having in some campuses where they end up sleeping in the library. So you think of the library as a place where you go to study, to access resources and to read. But for me, as a student, maybe the library is a place of refuge. That's where I go, especially if the library at my university is 24 hours library. So when people are sitting there studying, I'm actually sitting there to feel safe because I've got nowhere to sleep. So that's where I go for refuge. So the kind of data that I would generate in terms of my reflection of what the library represents would be different from somebody else who just sees the library as a place to go and study. So photo voice then allows for that, because then the picture speaks. And when you look at the picture, you're thinking, oh, library. But then when you engage with the participant about, oh, okay, why did you choose to take a picture of the library? Then you might find that the story behind the picture is actually what you may have not anticipated in terms of what you expect one to say when they speak about the picture of a library building. Right. And as I said, this is often used in the social sciences, but also in much of the health research as well. So people's healing journeys, health challenges that they might have, recovering from cancer, for example, and providing pictures of that journey. So photo voice then speaks to all of these things, and it allows for us to then have multiple layers of analysis when it comes to doing this kind of research. And then film. When you're doing film for research, not just film because you're interested in taking a film of people's encounters, you don't just want a footage where there's action that's happening, but it also speaks about a specific issue or a specific phenomenon that you want to tell the story about. And with that, you produce knowledge that assists us to get a better or a deeper understanding on a particular issue. Many of these would fall in the category of documentaries, for example. So you make a film and you follow people around, or you speak to people purposefully. So you choose people purposefully because of what they can offer in terms of what you're interested in. So you elicit particular data or opinion. You document people's lives who might have experienced certain challenges in their lives or successes. So documenting or filming of a particular subject. right? Or filming, and then after that, having an engagement and conversation around the film itself. And then based on that, that's where the data is generated. So together with the visual, but also the reflection on the visual, which is the film in this case. And then what some researchers do, similar to what we have in Photo Voice, is that you would ask the participants to make a film themselves. And then that film then becomes the data for the research. And this is very much visual methods is usually used in participatory action research, because as you can hear, as I explained, much of what happens in visual methods involves the participation of your participants from the beginning to the end. They decide what to film, they decide what pictures to take, there's engagement that happens there. So it's very participatory in many ways. And it's also part of like the emancipation, transformative type of research. So as you think again, going back to the paradigms, linking it to a research method, you can see then the possible research designs that you can then also consider for your research. So what is it that's driving you? What is your sense of reality and what you're interested in? How are you going to then think about the method that you're going to use to achieve that? And then from the method, what would make sense in terms of the data collection mechanism that you're going to use for you to be able to get that data. Okay, so I hope you're already, as we're going from yesterday to today, making these connections in terms of the research methodology itself, the research design, and how you then collect the data. Okay, and so this is just a continuation of the ways in which you can use film as a way to collect data. So some scholars would call it film essay. So you're taking or shooting a film, and through this film, you're actually telling a story, right? So if you were to write a story, we would be calling it an essay. But because you're shooting the story, you're showing and telling the story visually, then it's called a film essay, right? And it's a method of thinking and writing. So you're telling the story through images, you're telling the story through movement, you're telling the story through sound, you're telling the story through all these different and various parts of what a production looks like. So it's not just the visual that is the photo, but with film there's also motion. So motion also becomes very important. There's motion, there's visual, there's sound, and all of these together tell a particular story. Think about when you're watching a movie, and then when there's a particular scene, there's a specific music that they would play. And then when there's a particular scene, there's specific music that they play. That is an integral part of the production. And it's meant to elicit a particular emotion and reaction from you as the viewer engaging in this process. Okay. All right. And then we have what is called photohistorias. And photohistorias was introduced by Ricardo Gomez and Sara Vanini in 2015. So it's about 8 years ago. Again, it's a participatory form of photography, but focusing very much on history and on telling stories, right? So it's a variation of photo voice that combines participant-generated photos and semi-structured interviews, very much similar to the things that I've already said. And here you want to elicit lived experiences of immigrants. So when Gomez and Vanini did this study, they were interested specifically in the experiences of marginalized communities. And their specific focus was looking at immigrants. So people who are immigrants who are not natives in a particular community or a particular country, and some of the challenges that they experience. So how can people tell their story through images? Right. So what Photohistorias does is it combines the power of the image. What is it that is evoked in you when you see this image, but also the richness of telling the story. So the image is accompanied also by an interview, a reflection, and those interviews would then be alongside the images that the person would tell. And it's often used mostly, as I said, for marginalized communities who are often on the margins of society. So what they do, the power of photohistoria, as it said, is that they yield more depth and sensitivity than just photos only or interviews only. So this combination of the two adds that particular layer, according to Ricardo and Vanini. Okay, so they help to quickly get to deep conversation about profound and meaningful topics. So you use the photo in some sense as a prompt to be able to have deeper conversations about the challenges experienced by marginalized communities that would often not be easy to just jump into and ask those questions. So they provoke and they offer a pretext, as they indicate here, for conversations. Okay. All right. And then triangulation. Yesterday also, when we were talking about the research methodologies, talking about quantitative and qualitative, one of the questions that also came up was, what is triangulation, right? And in many ways, what I've just discussed, talking about conducting interviews and getting interviews as data and analyzing the interviews, and then on the other hand, having images as a way of telling stories, as a way also of collecting data, is in some way a form of triangulation, if you will. So data triangulation is where, as the researcher, you use two or more methods for the verification of the findings and results, right? So you would use triangulation to ensure that your data or your results, the work that you're doing, your research is robust, your research is comprehensive, and your research is well developed. And often, or in the beginning, triangulation actually formed part of pragmatism, which was the third leg of how we think about collecting data. So for a long time, we would either talk about qualitative research or quantitative research. And then the third leg came, which was mixed methods, saying, okay, I'm doing qualitative research, but I cannot generalize. I can only go so much. I can only interview so many people. But I'm missing out on so much because I cannot reach too many people, right? And on the other hand, quantitative research is like, okay, I'm conducting a survey, I'm giving a questionnaire, and I'm giving it to 1,000 people. That's wonderful. I can somehow generalize because I really have a sample that is somewhat representative, right? So I can generalize. However, I do not really have an in-depth understanding of why people said the things that they do, right? How many times do you eat a day? Twice? How many times do you eat a day? Once? How many times do you know? Is it because people cannot afford 3 meals a day? Is it because they are watching what they eat or dieting? Is it because, so there are some questions that are left unanswered. Of course, it's always about your hypothesis or your research question. But sometimes when you do one, there are certain things that remain missing. And when you're doing the other, same thing. And that's okay, because at the end of the day, it's about you wanting to answer a particular question. But then as researchers, as we know, always want to say, but what is it that can happen if maybe we combine the two? And that's when we speak about mixed methods also. And mixed methods also assist then with triangulation, because you're using different methods to get an understanding of a particular phenomena from different perspectives, or using different designs or methods, right? So data triangulation is also called cross-examination. Will I get an understanding of the issue of poverty if I ask these questions, or if I do the survey and do this? Or will I get an understanding if I get like a picture of what poverty looks like, how people understand it? So this is the picture literally, but also the picture in terms of how people express themselves around this issue. So what triangulation does is it double or triple checks the results that are obtained from the research. And as I said, the idea is to increase the credibility of your work and the validity of your work. Not that if you just use one method, it won't be valid or credible. It will. And many of us, many researchers, students, we just use one method. But what then is said is that if you triangulate, you increase the validity, you increase the credibility, right? So, and there are different ways in which you can triangulate your research. And one of them is if you're thinking methodologically. So there is methodological triangulation. And here is when you use different qualitative and quantitative methods to check for consistency of the findings, right? So if the different methods yield the same results, then validity can be established. While this method is popular of using methodological triangulation, it's time consuming to analyze information yielded from different methods. So if you think about doing qualitative research, here you are, you've interviewed 30 people and you've got stacks and stacks and stacks of data that you need to sit with. But then on the other hand, there you are, you go and then you conduct a survey, and you are lucky 2,000 people respond to a survey. And then there's also that to also analyze. So it's also about time as well. So the idea of triangulation is good. It increases credibility and validity, but we also need to also think about practicality. Right? There is merit in doing something that assists you to reach higher and more credibility, but there is also practicality. First of all, you want to complete your study, don't you? Second of all, do you have a bursary or a sponsor that's going to give you money to be able to transcribe so many transcripts, and also to do the statistical analysis that is required for the work? So, but it is a possibility, right? It's a possibility. It's something that you can do as a researcher. Right, so that's methodological triangulation. Then theory triangulation. This involves using different theoretical perspectives to make inferences about a distinct set of data. This method is the most difficult and time-consuming. So again, here you think about your theoretical framework. You think about the theory that you're using. Often, especially at PhD level, always suggest that you cannot just draw from one theory. It's important to also put theories in conversation with each other and see how these theories assist you to be able to make sense of your data, to build on this data. Because sometimes with just one theory, there's only so far that you can go. And then a second or a third theory also enriches, and it allows for you to really dance with that data that you have. And be in conversation with that data, and make meaning, make the work very meaningful. So it's actually something beautiful. but it can be time consuming as well, because you really need to then engage and understand all these different theories, and then draw from all of them. There again, that's triangulation. Think of this as a triangle, and look at the different points of the triangle, and looking at how these points speak to each other, right? And then investigator triangulation, or researcher triangulation. So several researchers are used in the analysis of the process. So you, as the researcher, you conduct the work, you conduct the research, you do the analysis, but then you also get somebody else or a colleague, another researcher, to also engage with the research and see whether the themes that are coming up or the analysis that they do will be in line with your own analysis. And of course, if that's the case, then you know you're on the right track, right? Because we're looking at the same data. You're looking at this data, I'm looking at this data. Are we seeing the same things in terms of what's coming out? And ideally, that's how it should be. If we're coming up with different things, then maybe we need to go back to the drawing board. So that's what research or investigator triangulation speaks to say, can someone else get to the same conclusion that you have come to? And then environmental triangulation. This one is quite specific, and it's interested in or looks at studies where findings can be influenced by environmental factors. So when was the work done? Where was the work done? So factors such as where, the setting, the location, what was it like, the time, the day, when the work took place. So again, here, I would imagine maybe our colleagues in environmental sciences, for example, who often do work outdoors or outside. Was this research done in the winter? Was this research done in the summer? And what were then what are the implications of the finding as it relates to when it was done, but also the context as well. Our summer or our winter is not necessarily the same as the summer or winter in a different continent, and the seasons and how the environment responds or reacts might not be the same, right? So those things also then play a role as well. So I'm sitting here in South Africa, I'm a researcher doing a study on whatever, and then I get these results, and then my colleague also in the similar or same field sitting in another country does a study. Would the results necessarily be the same in terms of what we find if we've drawn from similar things? Because the question was, when my colleague did the work, was it during the day or at night? What time of the year was it? And the same for me. And how are those variables or factors influencing what we find as our findings? Okay, and then lastly, just data triangulation, the easiest method to implement, it's argued. And here you're just using a variety of information or data sources in order to increase the validity of the results. And here again, you can combine, you can do a focus group, but also do individual interviews. So different data sources, and then see, okay, what is it that's coming out from doing these different types of collection of data, and then triangulate that. Okay, I hope that's very clear. And then the last thing that we're going to be focusing on now is the issue of data analysis. So now you have collected your data, you are sitting with your data. What happens now? Okay, so now you need to make meaning of this data. And in qualitative research, just like the many research designs that we have, we also have quite a number of data analysis methods that are possible for you to choose from as a researcher doing qualitative research. But once again, it's again going to be guided by how you collected your data. What data did you collect? What is your objective? And how is the data analysis type that you're choosing linked to the paradigm that you're using. So this is also very, very important. So some of the data analysis types that we have is content analysis. We have grounded theory. We spoke quite at length about grounded theory yesterday. Narrative analysis, discourse analysis, conversational analysis. And you'll see grounded theory appears here again as a data analysis method. And it also appeared yesterday as a research design. And you'll remember from our engagement that we spoke about how grounded theory includes everything all together, because its interest is about developing a theory, and developing a theory from the ground up, from the very beginning, as you start with the collection of your data. Okay, and then just a snapshot in terms of the different types of content analysis. And content analysis is not only applicable to qualitative research, but you can also do content analysis when you're doing quantitative research as well. So what is the purpose of content analysis? And I'm sure you can see, so you can read on the quantitative content analysis, but I want to focus and zoom in on the qualitative content analysis, because I want you to think about the content analysis as it relates to qualitative research, but also as it relates to all the different topics that we've discussed thus far. So with content analysis, you are interested in developing themes that capture the underlying meaning of the data portions, right? So you have your data, you have your transcripts, so you're interested in the content, but not just content at face value in terms of what people have said, right? But it's also latent meaning based purpose here. So you're interested in the underlying meanings of the data portions that people have shared with you. So you identify the relevant data. As you're sitting with your transcripts, you are saying, okay, what is my research question again? Or what are my research questions? What objective am I trying to reach? So, and again, that's going to be possible if your interview schedule, the questions that you asked, the interviews were in line with your research question. Then the data that you are now sitting with will then speak to those research questions. So here's your data. You identify relevant data. What is it that's coming out that's linked to what you want to answer? And then the coding. You code by examining the text, including the context and the background, right? So what is the text telling me, but also the context wherein this information was shared, and the background of what I want to achieve as well. So how do I then do the coding process? And then after coding, you generate themes. So codes would be small themes, if I can call them that. And then from these small themes, you're going to have the bigger umbrella themes that are going to come out, because codes can be many. If you have interviewed somebody and you spoke to them for an hour or 2 hours, and they've shared pages and pages and pages of transcripts when you've transcribed, you're now looking at the different codes. What are the words? What are the phrases that are standing out for you from all these different interviews that can be drawn and put together to form themes that you will then use to be able to analyze and make meaning of the data more broadly. So then you generate the themes to represent the underlying meaning of the data. And then, as I said, you use these themes to address your research question. Okay, all right. So content analysis. So in quantitative content analysis, just quickly, to research the importance of employment issues, this is an example here, and thinking about the content of the work that you're doing. So in a quantitative study, this is how you would do it, right? The example is that you're interested in researching the importance of employment issues in political campaigns. right? So as a quantitative researcher, you could analyze campaign speeches as an example of what your focus could be. You analyze campaign speeches, so you look at different campaign speeches, and with those speeches, you sit with them, and then you look for the frequency of terms such as unemployment. So you look at 10 speeches, and you say, okay, the EFF, the DA, the ANC, the IFP, COPE, and all these different political groupings, and then you say, okay, they are campaigning, like now as they're campaigning for 2024, what speeches are they giving? And then you get access to these speeches and say, okay, how many of them are paying attention to issues of unemployment? So I'm looking at the speech from this particular party. So what is the frequency of the term unemployment? What is the frequency of the term jobs? So then you can be able to say, okay, these are the things that are foregrounded by all the different political parties, or the majority of the political parties are foregrounding this. So you're looking at the frequency, you're looking at the number. So you're not really looking at the underlying issues around unemployment and issues of unemployment. What are they saying about work? What are they saying about all these different things? So you look at the frequency, and then you use the statistical analysis to find the differences over time or between candidates. So as I said, between the different political parties in a country like South Africa, because we look at political parties and not individuals, or you look at the different campaign speeches from the past 20 years, and you say, okay, looking at these different speeches over time, how can I analyze for unemployment, analyze for jobs, analyze for work? What has changed? What has stayed the same? What has been seen as something that's in the foreground or forefront? And how can we then make meaning of this in terms of what is it that political campaigns are about when it comes to engaging with citizenry? All right. And then qualitative content analysis, an example. Again, using the same example, is that you could locate the word unemployment, right, as a code here in the speeches, and then identify what other words or phrases appear next to it, right? So unemployment and the economy, unemployment and issues of inequality. Okay, what is this telling us? So you're analyzing differently, right? As you can see, and then analyzing unemployment and laziness. So what are these people saying? Are they saying unemployment is bad for the economy, or the economy is suffering because of high unemployment and many people are relying on the state? Are they saying that unemployment is also linked to issues of inequality? Who is unemployed, and what are the implications of that, and what causes unemployment, and what does it mean in closing the gap on inequality or not inequality? So you're already starting to think about this, right? And then thinking around unemployment and laziness. Are many people unemployed because they are lazy, they don't want to work, they are picky? What's going on? So your analysis will then be determined by what is it that is appearing in the speeches. So it's not just the content, but how the content is formulated, right? If the formulation is that unemployment is alongside inequality, and you start thinking, okay, so we're talking about issues of inequality here and what that's about. If unemployment is together with laziness, then that's also a different kind of labeling, right? And then when you do that, then you can analyze the meanings of these relationships to better understand the intentions and targets of different campaigns. So are these politicians saying that the jobs are there? We have unemployment, yes, but the jobs are there. We have unemployment because people are lazy. Is that what we're hearing here? And what are the implications of that? So then your study will then tell us at the end that, okay, this is what we are finding in terms of the focus of political campaigns in these days. Okay, so as I'm doing this and I'm giving these examples, I'm kind of hoping that you are also thinking about your own research, your own study, and thinking about the possibilities of your own data analysis. So you can just remove employment issues in political campaigns, for example, and put your own study focus, right? Qualitative understanding of whatever your study that you're doing, and think about, okay, when you have the data, what are some of the things that you're going to be looking at as it relates to your research question. Okay, and then grounded theory analysis. With grounded theory, I did indicate that the coding happens immediately when you start collecting your data. So, and the coding happens at different levels. So there's open coding, which is the process of breaking down, of examining, of comparing, of conceptualizing and categorizing the data. So from the very first participant, you're already starting to think about issues that are coming up, issues that are standing out as you interview, and then you interview the second person, you're already making comparisons as well, and say, okay, what are some of the things that are already coming up? This one said this and that one said that. So it's open coding. So at the basic level, to just look at what are the things that are coming up. And then axial coding. So it's a set of procedures where data are put back together. So when you've now put everything apart in terms of open coding and said, what are the specific things that are coming up from this data? So this is the issue that's coming out. This is the issue that's coming. This is so from these 20 interviews, these are the different things. So think about a sticky note and putting something on a sticky note. And this is how many researchers, many of us used to do this. And I know that many of us still do this. And now we're using software programs such as Atlas TI, for example, which assists. It's a sticky note that is electronic, right? So you have all those different notes, if you think about it. And then with axial coding, then you put all these nodes together. Now you group them, right? You put them together in new ways. So you have all of them all over. Think of them on your wall or on your table. And then you come back to them, and then you put them together in new ways after you've done the open coding, by now making connections between the different categories. Okay, this one talks about unemployment, for example. Okay, unemployment as it relates to poverty, unemployment as it relates to family challenges, unemployment. So you start making connections in terms of the categories that you are seeing coming up, right? So that's when, so this is now already leading you to coming up with themes, right? But this is how you start. And then selective coding, the procedure of selecting the core category. So the central issue, the storyline. So I have these codes, I have these 10 codes, and I'm grouping them together. And after putting them together, I'm looking at them and I'm saying, okay, what is the story that this is telling me? What is this about? Right? And that which comes out for you, that phrase that comes out for you, that story that comes out for you, that is your central issue, right? So that becomes the core category, which as we go now, you'll see it becomes your theme, right? So, and that's why you cannot have 20 or 30 themes in your study. You need to have just a number of maybe 3 or 5 or 6 themes, depending on your study, of course. But always being careful to say, what is this theme about and what does it encapsulate, right? You relate this category to other categories. other themes, validating the relationships. Is this really related to that? Is really unemployment linked to poverty, or am I forcing this here? Only 3 people out of 20 mentioned poverty. So maybe poverty is not a main issue, a code that I can link to this. It was just for those 3 people. So 3 out of 20. So it cannot maybe be a main issue or a main code. So what are the relationships, right? So you have this conversation with yourself. You have this conversation with your data as you go along, right? And there are very a lot of similarities in many of these analysis types, but then there are also nuances that you also need to take note of, that you need to be able to explain to your reader, to your supervisor, to say, I've chosen this analysis technique because of 1, 2, and 3. This is the analysis technique that's going to assist me to be able to make meaning of my data, right? So narrative analysis, the third one. Narrative analysis has got different sub-layers under it, right? So there's thematic analysis, there's structural analysis, there's interactional analysis, there's performative analysis. Again, this will also, again, be led or influenced by the way in which you collected your data, right? If you did visual methodology, for example, would it make sense to have interactional analysis? Would it make sense to have thematic analysis? So you need to look at the data and how you're going to collect your data, the design that you're going to use, because that then informs what would make sense in terms of how you're going to analyze your data. And the themes, thematic analysis, the emphasis is on what is said, right? And not how it is said. So you're looking at the themes. What are themes? What are the themes that are emerging? What is it that's being said? So people are talking about unemployment. They're talking about how it's a challenge. They're talking about how financial issues are affecting their family. So what is being said? And not so much how it's being said. So it's the themes that are appearing, and you're looking at those themes and you're analyzing those themes. Structural analysis, it's about the way the story is structured. It's the way the story is told, right? So it's not just about the content, because the content is important, but the use of narrative mechanism is also very important. How is the person telling the story? What is it that they're emphasizing? What is it that they're starting with? What is it that they spend a lot of time talking about? So the way in which the story is told is very important. And this means sitting down with the transcript to really engage and look at the narrative, how the story is told. And then interactional analysis. This one is about the dialogue between you as the researcher and the person telling the narrative, right? And it's about the co-construction of meaning. And here, again, it's about the participatory nature of the process. And this will also be how you collected your data. Was it more of a dialogue where there was conversation that was taking place, and sharing and being in dialogue and not just asking the questions? So it's about the interaction also that's very important in interactional analysis. And also, if it was a group of people, then it's also very important. So, for example, if you think about focus groups often work, or an analysis type that works is your discourse analysis, but it's also interactional analysis is also important as well. How are the people engaging with each other? How is the narrative flowing? How is the interaction taking place as well? And then performative analysis, you look at the narrative as a performance that explores the use of words and gestures to get a story across, right? So this model of narrative includes an examination of the response of an audience to the narrative. And here, when you think about film, so telling a story through film, telling a story through drawing or painting, and then engaging also with how the audience respond to the painting that you've produced, how the audience respond to this narrative that you're telling visually is also very important. And then discourse analysis. Discourse is verbal or written communication between people that goes beyond a single sentence. It goes beyond language, and it looks at the overall meaning conveyed by language in context. So it's not just about what I'm saying, but it's about how I'm saying it, but it's also about the underlying meaning of what I'm saying, right? So the context here means the social context, it means the cultural context, it means the political context, it means historical context, and all of those become part of your analysis. So when you're looking at unemployment as it relates to the intergenerational challenges of lack of access to resources, how unemployment can be understood from a historical context, how unemployment can be linked to issues of education and access to education, how unemployment can also be linked to issues of gender and challenges around gender inequities, or cultural implications of how gender is perceived and how that can link to this issue that you're looking at. So what are some of the underlying issues that are coming in how people are talking about the phenomena that you're engaging with them on, right? Discourse analysis is unique because it, again, when we go back to the paradigms, it's about the socially constructed nature of our understanding of the world. And looking at it from that standpoint, then we can say, because reality is socially constructed, then what happens in the social world has a direct impact in the ways in which we're going to experience the world. Right. So that subjective standpoint of how I perceive my experience to be becomes very important. But my experience is very much influenced by the social context wherein I find myself. So discourse analysis goes beyond the literal meaning of words and languages. It goes beyond that. Okay. So, and here are just some of the examples, if maybe you're thinking about what could that look like. So some form of power or inequality, what you look at in discourse analysis. So an example would be how affluent individuals interact with those who are less wealthy. Right? What is it that happens there when people who have more interact or undermine those who are less wealthy? So the issues of power and inequality and how that plays out in society. That could be something you're interested in, and then do a discourse analysis on that. How people communicate in a specific context. So in a situation with colleagues versus a board meeting. So how we engage and carry ourselves in these different contexts also becomes meaningful when it comes to analysis. And then ideologies, values, and beliefs are shared in how we use language as well. As I said, also in political speeches. So political speeches are not free of ideologies. How communication is used to achieve social goals, such as maintaining a friendship or navigating conflict, right? How do you understand that when you're looking at not just the language, but also an underlying meaning? So if you're interested in issues of power imbalances in different contexts, in different scenarios, then discourse analysis would be meaningful for you if you're interested in issues of power imbalances. Okay. So what is it that we do in qualitative research when it comes to data analysis? There's inductive coding, starting from the specific to the broad, right? So starting with the coding, the small coding, as that I said before, the sticky notes are small things. And then from the sticky notes, the specific, you go to the broad, and that's where the themes come. Okay. And then you ascribe these codes to codes. So this is where you also then use excerpts, where you do not just offer a theme in your analysis, but you also need to show us that, as 7 of the 10 participants indicated, as one participant said this and that and that, and this other participant said this and that and that. This shows us that this is the issue, or this is what they're thinking about. So the codes are also very important in qualitative research. Okay. And as I've said, codes are driven by the questions. So how you're going to code is going to be led and directed by your research questions. Focus on those that will help you and make your life a little easy. Remember your conceptual framework also. What concepts are there? What concepts are you using? And how are those assisting you and framing the work that you're doing? So the themes, you have your raw data, your transcripts, conversations about the phenomena that you are looking at. And then from those, you have your codes. And then from the codes, you put those together, and then you come up with themes. So what are the patterns that are coming up? So these are things that cut across the different codes. So if you've got 10 codes, with those 10 codes, what is the thing that cuts across all of them? And that thing that cuts across them will be your theme. And then the other codes as well, same thing. And then as many as your data allows you to have. All right. And you need to ask yourself, is this a theme? Is this a theme, or is this a code? And why am I saying that this is a theme? Based on what I have here. And what is the quality of this theme? What does it allow me to do? What are the things that are coming up? How does it link to my research questions? What are the boundaries of this theme? So that you don't have 2 or 3 themes that are saying the same thing. So what are the boundaries of this theme? What is it covering? What is it not covering? And then you have another theme, and then you have another theme. And for you to have a theme, you need to have data that supports that theme. Do you have enough data? As I said, if only 2 of your 20 participants said that, that cannot be a theme. It cannot. So a theme is something that has to cut across all or the majority of what your data is revealing. Okay, and are the themes connected to one another? And at the end, are they connected to a research question? Analysis, when you're done with collecting your data, start analysis immediately. Start already engaging your transcripts, start engaging, thinking about coding, because it's good when it's still fresh. Don't put your data aside and then 3 months later you go and revisit your data. You miss a lot, because it's good when it's still fresh, when you can still remember and see and hear the voices of your participants. Okay, and as we said, if you're interested again also in triangulation, involve more than one person. Some people have research assistants. You can have a statistician but that's for people doing quantitative research. But here's someone who can do member checking for you also. Analysis and writing, you might need funding for that as well, or do it yourself. And then the code book. I spoke about the transcripts, or rather the sticky notes earlier. So you can have a little book where you put your codes together. If you're doing this manually, if you're doing this using a software, then it becomes a bit easier for you, because all of these things that I say here, you can do that on the software itself. If you're using maybe Atlas, for example, definition, full definition, guidelines when to use this code, how are you going to use this? If you've done this, then the actual putting things together, thematizing and writing becomes easier. This is the hard job, and if you get it right, the rest is easier. And this is also, again, continuing on the code book. And this is just an example of how you can think about code book entries. Okay, so what is my code? My code is margin, people living in the margins. And what is it that people in the research have said about margins or being marginalized or living in the margins or being from a marginalized community? And then a definition of this code is that with this code, I'm interested in things around marginality, marginalized community members, and who are those community members? What are the boundaries in terms of who would fit under this code and who would not? When to use it. Every time if I see something in a transcript that refers to this or that, I know that's a code, so that's when I'm going to use it. That's when it will be relevant. And then example as you have it there. So you can do it in a way that is meaningful for you, that makes sense for you. Okay. Codes are usually very specific. As I said, it's something very specific. Margin or marginalization or poverty. Poverty is a code. And you may have over 100 codes. Again, how big are your transcripts? How many people did you interview? That's going to lead to the possible number of codes that you might have. And with all these codes, you may not use all of them, because with these codes, then you have to say, okay, is this appearing in all of my transcripts? Is it appearing in all of the people that I've interviewed? Okay, maybe only 45 or 30. So then from there, you start narrowing down, right? You cluster the codes, as I said, and then with clustering these codes, then you start developing your themes. These are the categories I spoke about. This is just a summary, really, of the things that I've already said. So I'm just going to continue. All right. And here again, this is an example in terms of the themes that you would have. And then maybe under the themes, you have the sub-themes as well. What is it that you're going to be covering under each theme? So you see the A, B, C, D, E. So your theme would be experiences of the tsunami, reactions following the tsunami. And then under those themes, what are you going to be discussing? Experience of the tsunami, I'm going to experience how people, were thinking about running away. They were thinking about survival. So the experience was that of fear, of wanting to run away, leaving home, thinking about their family, and witnessing and seeing people dying, people losing their homes. So these are all the experiences of tsunami. And then you speak to that, and then you draw from what people said about witnessing traumatic events. What is it that people said about searching for their loved ones? What did the participants say about that? This would be experiences of people who have experienced a tsunami. Okay, so these are the examples. And then you see there, those are the themes that this person then came up with. Okay, and then with visual methods, as I said, because it's very participatory, analysis is collaborative, and the codes that we've just spoken about and the themes come from the visuals themselves. So in collaboration, in conversation with the people who took the photos, because imagine the example that I gave earlier around how you might look at a photo of a library and think, oh, okay, this is about studying, wanting to succeed. Oh, wonderful. Only to find that, no, actually, this is about someone who was thinking about some of the challenges and struggles of not having a place to sleep and sleeping in the library. So that's why collaboration is very important, and being in conversation when it comes to coding, so that you actually don't interpret incorrectly what someone meant. Okay. And then lastly, before I go to our discussion and questions, I never realized how quickly time just goes. Another important thing that you need to think about is reflexivity. As a qualitative researcher, you always need to be reflexive of the process of conducting research. This is something that has now become an integral part of the expectation from many of the supervisors, examiners, to say, but what was that process like for you? Because as you come in, understanding that qualitative research is also very subjective, and you as the instrument of the research cannot really divorce yourself from the work. And so what does that mean for you? The whole process of conducting research and how it affected you and you were affected by it. You come with your own values against the values of those that you're going to be doing research with alongside. So reflexivity becomes very, very important. So this is just a summary in terms of how to think about reflexivity and how it contributes to your work being trustworthy, because you're also self-aware. Okay. And then the ethics. Ethics are always very important as well, to think about ethics. And this is just the summary of some of the things that you need to think about when you're thinking about ethics in conducting academic research work. Okay. And with that, I pause and I come back to us in the room. And I would like us to spend this time that is left in our session to engage. I would like to hear some of your reflections. I would like to hear some of your comments. And I would like to hear, yes, some of the questions that you might have. All right, so we have a question. Is it possible to utilize until data saturation for sample size determination in qualitative? I can't read the name. Hinkosa, can you elaborate on your question? I'm not sure I understand. Is it possible to utilize until data saturation? To utilize what? Maybe there's a word missing. I'm not sure what you're saying. I hope you're still there. So if you can just type out your question again fully. Is it possible to utilize what until data saturation for sample size in qualitative data? If you could do that for me, please, then I can hopefully be able to respond to you. Okay. Okay, Mpho. How does one refer to a workshop presentation under literature review or bibliography, in this case, when there is a point that is seen pertinent by the researcher? Okay, so depending on what referencing guideline you're using in your field, so whether it's Harvard or APA or Chicago, so I'm not sure which one you're using in your field, you just need to go and check the referencing guidelines. They should have specification in terms of how to reference a workshop. So for example, if you're referencing a conference, maybe a paper that you heard at a conference and you want to reference that paper. So if it's a workshop, and if there's it was a facilitator, then you just indicate either the name of the workshop or even the name of the facilitator. So let's say the facilitator was Sagalo, so Sagalo 2023, and the workshop was selecting methodology and research design, qualitative research, online workshop on the 27th of July 2023. So that's how you would reference it. Okay, so and of course, if there's a link that is available, if the workshop was online or if the workshop was recorded, then you can include the link as well, so that if someone is interested in further details around that workshop or to check that workshop, that they're able to do so. So you just provide information about that workshop. Okay, so you provide the title of the workshop, selecting a methodology and research design in qualitative research, conducted on the 27th of July, 2023. You can even indicate they're facilitated by so-and-so. And if it was online, you can say online workshop. If it was in person, then you can say Pretoria, the date, when the workshop was conducted. I hope this is helpful, Mpho. But the way that you would structure what I've just said in terms of where the date goes, where the title goes, and all of that would be determined by the referencing guideline that is used in your discipline. Okay. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Kazim, you're asking about triangulation and how it's different from integration. I must say I'm not sure. What the difference would be, because I'm not very familiar with the utilization of the idea of integration. And if that's okay with you, I'm going to note this down. And then for our next session, or I'll check with my colleagues whether I can provide an answer that can be posted, where the presentation is going to be posted, where the link is going to be shared with all of you of this presentation today. I can share it that way so that you can have the answer quicker. Otherwise, I can share the answer in the next session that we're going to have. Before I start with that session, I can do that with the hope that you're going to be in attendance at that session. So that's what I will do for you. Okay. So difference between triangulation and integration, I'll find that out for you. Okay. Okay, Mduduzi. So when you're talking about the philosophical underpinnings, are you talking about what we were discussing yesterday in terms of the different paradigms and the ontologies and epistemological underpinning of the work and how that guides the work that you're doing? Is that what you're talking about in terms of linking that with the data analysis method that you use? If you are, remember that I said when you are choosing the paradigm, when you are deciding on what it is that guides you in terms of how you make meaning of reality, and then how that then guides the way in which you do research, it becomes easier because all of them are interconnected, right? They're all interrelated. So if you're interested in work that is constructivist or interpretivist, or the work that is emancipatory, then you know that when it comes to your data analysis method, you are already leaning towards discourse analysis. So that which you do at the beginning in terms of how you think about the ways in which reality is constructed is going to inform the objectives of your research, and it's going to inform the design that you're going to use. And based on that design already, that also speaks to the data analysis method that you're going to use. So all of them have to be aligned to one another for the work that you're doing to be able to provide meaningful results for you as a researcher. I hope I understood you correctly there. And if I didn't, please go ahead and just follow up based on my response. Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Portia. I'm glad that you found everything easy to understand and you could follow, and that the examples were useful. Thank you. Okay, so Reuna, there are many studies that one could think about that you could use discourse analysis on. So, for example, if you're interested in gender-based violence, gender-based violence, again, is going to depend on the approach that you are coming with. So you can look at gender-based violence and look at not only the experience of gender-based violence or what causes gender-based violence, but look at the ways in which gender-based violence is very much embedded in issues of gender inequalities. Gender-based violence is very much embedded in a society that is unequal. Gender-based violence is very much linked to issues of cultural practices that are sometimes disadvantageous towards women, right? And how the idea of gender-based violence cannot just be understood at face value in terms of, oh, okay, there's a high increase or a high number of gender-based violence and femicide, and men are killing women, for example, but also how actually the society configuration and the socialization and the structural imbalances are also influencing factors that contribute towards gender-based violence. And therefore, we cannot just look at gender-based violence as the issue of all men in society are problematic, right? Toxic masculinity is leading to gender-based violence. While that is how it manifests, and it needs to be given attention and people have to be accountable, when you use a discourse analysis, you would also look at the underlying issues that are linked to what is it that gives birth to toxic masculinities? What is it that gives birth to gender inequities in society that leads to these challenges that lead us to gender-based violence, right? So when we're talking about gender empowerment or women empowerment, what are the implications of that in a society where girls and boys are socialized in ways that are not aligned to what the idea of gender empowerment would be? So this would be how you then engage or analyze the discourse. So you will not just be looking at the text or the language where it says in South Africa, gender-based violence is very problematic. It's a challenge. We have all these numbers and so many women and the experience of women every day in the streets or at work. Those are all valid and very important. But to say, what is it that drives this? What is it that is instrumental in creating an enabling environment for this to happen? And what is it about South Africa that makes the ground fertile for challenges of gender-based violence? Okay, so that would form part of your analysis in terms of how you make sense of the phenomenon of gender-based violence using discourse analysis. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Can triangulation be employed on methodology as well as on data collection in a single research project or study? Simple answer, yes, you can do that. Might be a little bit of work for you, but you most definitely can do that. You can use different methods, and then the way in which you collect data also can also be more than one. So you can triangulate at different levels in one study, most definitely, yes. Okay, Rauna. Okay, so it's the same question. Okay, it was an important question for you. Yes, Josh. The links are there for you. Thank you for confirming that. All right, so most of what I'm seeing right now are just comments. And with your comments, appreciation comments, for that, to me, that then means that you understood and that the lecture made sense to you. So thank you very much. Okay, Ruth. When conducting focus groups, the vignette can be used on its own. So, but you have to make sure that the vignette that you choose, right, the example or the scenario that you use in your focus group captures and covers your research objective. So you really need to be sure that the vignette that you're going to use is going to capture the research objective that you have set for yourself. Because remember, at the end of the day, you always need to be thinking about your research objective. So it can replace the questions in the focus group discussion, but it doesn't have to. So you can use the vignette on its own, or you can use the vignette as a prompt, but also have the questions as well. What I would encourage is that at least have 2 or 3 questions. Especially in the beginning also, where you give an overview and the topic. You don't want to immediately just jump into the vignette. Maybe you can just have a question that you throw to the group, and then following that you use the vignette. Okay, but you most definitely can use a vignette as a way to open up the conversation and engagement with the participants in the focus group, most definitely. Yeah. Make sure you have a very good vignette, as I said. Okay. Will you be touching on discussion of results, conclusion, and recommendations? Mamunyaka, there is still other sessions that are going to be coming. And I trust that my colleagues are going to be touching on issues around results and conclusion. So these are different chapters. So this one was focusing more on your methodology chapter, right? Understanding, of course, that your methodology chapter is not divorced from all the other chapters. But yes, this was focusing on the methodology chapter. And I believe that there are going to be other sections or sessions that my other colleagues are going to be giving. And I trust that they're going to be covering these aspects as well. One of the sessions that I'm going to be doing, facilitating, is on writing for publication, which is a requirement for you now as M&D students. And there, I will be touching on results, conclusions, and recommendations, but that would be in the context of writing paper for publication. So that might still be useful for you, but there I will be covering that, but in that context. All right. I hope and believe that my colleagues will be touching on these aspects that you raise in other sessions as well. All right. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to you too for attending this session and for being very interactive through your comments and your questions. I do hope that I managed to answer your questions. And I wish you all of the best as you continue with your proposals, with your draft chapters. All the best. Until we see each other again very soon, focusing on a different topic altogether. All right, everybody, have a good evening. Until next time, goodbye.